Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Today we have in the studio a man who's been keeping our community tick for decades, Juan Candelaria. He's the state representative of the 95th General Assembly District. He's currently running for an 11th two-year term. And usually he's on the other side of this microphone as a co-host on Saturdays of WNHH's Hechos y Opiniones.
That's Hechos y Opiniones. Very good, Paul.
The state's leading Spanish language radio program. Juan, thanks so much for coming in today. It's great to have you on the other side of the mic.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for having me. I think being on the other side feels a little bit different.
So
right?
Let me know now. Let me know, since you're a regular radio host, let me know if I'm missing any key questions or anything. We talked about, we're going to talk about how the session went. It was a short session. And then what are the issues coming up while you're running for re-election, and basically the state of Latino politics in New Haven and the state. Sound good?
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
So short session, even number year, not as many weeks. Did you get much done?
We got some things done. Not much, unfortunately. We went through the whole process. As you know, I sit on the Appropriations Committee. And we went through the whole process of really getting the input from the community, from advocates, from agencies, from constituents about what matters to them. And at the end of the day, we didn't do a budget. Right.
Now, you don't have to. Just so people know, you pass it to your budget.
We do pass it
and
to your
then on the odd number year, then you come back to tweak it because the world changes, things change, money changes. And there was a big argument this year about whether to reopen it. Because once you decide to reopen it, then everything's on the table.
Everything's on the table. And we were very concerned that there was up to $150 million on the table for cuts. So we were very concerned because when we did the biennial budget, we put in a lot of good things within that budget that are critical to our constituencies, and we were concerned opening that up. Right, we put money for higher education, and that's critical. Child care, things that are important to our constituency, and opening it up again would have put everything back on the table. But I think at the end of the day, we didn't open it up, but we addressed some critical components within that budget. And that is, we added about $160 million for higher education. We put in $50 million for nonprofits. We put about $21 million for child care. And then we did mental health, about $24 million.
And you were able to do that without revisiting the budget. Is that because there was existing money you could tap and move around?
So there were some federal dollars that we had, extra federal dollars that were not utilized, and they were repurposed, those dollars.
So obviously that you're getting ready for the storm next year, because you mentioned federal dollars, ARPA, meaning the federal pandemic relief money.
Funding.
All over the country, people are starting to ring the bells like, don't panic yet, but next year that money runs out.
Exactly.
Schools, higher ed, they're saying that the money's just not going to be there, and early childhood education, like you mentioned. What's the thinking now for that?
So here's the thing. Now we are all really, really thinking about, because once those dollars were distributed, Board of Educations, nonprofits, and others plug that to their general fund budgets, and some of them hire staff with those dollars. And now we're running out of the money.
They're already doing cuts everywhere.
Exactly.
New Haven isn't even one of the bigger ones. We thought it was a big deal with 60 whatever jobs cut.
68 job cuts.
But Hartford had twice many, yeah.
Yeah, over 200 in Hartford.
Yeah.
So it is alarming, right? And we have to go back to the drawing board next year and really have a serious conversation on what is our priorities. And I believe, to me, education is the number one priority for all of us. And we need to make sure that we looked at our budget and identify additional dollars that we can reallocate to ensure that we cover those shortfalls that these Board of Eds will be facing.
So as you know much better than I do, one of the big debates that began this year and will reprise next year in a bigger way that you're talking about now, where you can find money, is what to do about the volatility cap. So there was a bipartisan agreement, Democrats and Republicans, 2017. It was renewed in 2023, I believe.
Correct.
That said that when we get a lot of money in because of quarterly returns from very wealthy hedge fund and other financiers people, that money goes up and down like a roller coaster.
Correct.
And that we weren't going to spend it all when we get it and then not have it there. We're going to limit how much we can spend from it and use the rest of that money to pay down debt, because we have so much of it, especially with pension debt, and put it in the rainy day fund for emergencies. We now maxed out. We actually can't put any more in rainy day fund, which is a good
we
thing.
have over $4 billion in the rainy day
And that's
fund,
a good thing.
which is a good thing, correct.
But you can't put more in. And we have plenty of debt to pay down. But Governor Lamont and the Republicans have generally felt that they don't want to reopen that. And a lot of the Democrats were saying, you're going to hear this a lot more next year, correct?
We are.
That, we made that deal when we had one set of figures about our finances. Now they look different. There's more money that we're putting in the right places, and there's left over. We can use it there. And the other side's telling you, watch out, because then if there's a recession, that could all go away in a day. Where are you on that?
So, to be honest with you, Paul, we have to be very conscious that we're not sure what's going to happen. Right now, we are projecting that we're going to have a surplus for 2025. So that's something that's very positive. But at the end of the day, I think we created these guardrails, right, to ensure that we pay down our pension, that we have money in the rainy day fund, and I think we have accomplished that. So I think collectively we have to go back to the drawing board and look, do we need to open it up? Because there's other needs that we need to invest in, right? We need to invest more dollars in education. We need to invest more dollars in childcare, right? We need to invest more dollars in social services to our nonprofits. So we need to really have that conversation and look how our revenues are matching up. Are we really getting back in revenue what we expected? And if we are, let's have the conversation collectively and say, how are we going to reinvest those dollars? How are we going to make all these Board of Educations whole again? Those are our facing deficits.
Can we make them whole again, or is it going to be as much as we can get there?
It's hard always to say, right? Because everything changes day to day. We don't know what's it going to look like next year. My goal, personally, as a legislator, is I want to make sure we go back and we address it, we look at it, because it's critical that we have our schools funded, that they have the adequate funding so that teachers can actually teach, that students have the resources, the materials for them to succeed. And if we don't invest in education, then that's going to hamper the future of our children. And at the end of the day, they are our future. So we have to ensure that we're investing those dollars.
So it's just so I got it right. You would like to revisit the formula for the volatility caps to maybe free up some money for education.
Maybe open it up, but that's a longer conversation that involves a lot of other colleagues, right? More people that are higher than me. They're a different level to have those conversations. But I think that we need to start the conversation. And I think many of us have expressed the need to do that.
Mm-hmm. And then paid sick days and baby bonds were two issues that got over the finish line this year, expanding paid sick time for more people, and baby bonds, which you guys had passed 2 years ago. The governor's office put the brakes on it, but it couldn't go into practice. The governor wouldn't approve the funding for it. So you now got that over the line. How did that happen? Now we have
that, which is excellent. This was an endeavor from the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, because we looked at, and of course I have to acknowledge the work of our treasurer, Eric Russell, and Sean Wooden, who really came up with the idea, having conversations with the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, because how was it that we break that generational wealth cycle? We create generational wealth, and the only way to do that is let's give them a kickstart, and creating the baby bond is a kickstart for these children. When they reach the age of 18, they could use it to buy their first home. They could invest for college.
So now if you're a low-income person in New Haven, if you have a kid, that kid gets some money at birth they can use.
Up to $3,000.
And then that gets interest by the time they get to be 18. They can use it to start a business, go to college, buy a house.
Yep. Perfect.
So, and we're talking to Juan Candelaria, State Representative, 95th District here on Dateline, New Haven. Juan, you mentioned that it's the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus or Black and Latino Caucus?
Well, it is the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, and then there was the creation of the Puerto Rican and Latino Caucus.
Oh, so they're two separate.
There's another separate, correct.
And are all the Latino legislators Puerto Rican?
Not all of them. No, not all of them. You have some from Guatemala, Argentina.
So are they in the Black
Cuba,
and Puerto Rican Caucus?
And they're part of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. And then we have a separate caucus, which is the Puerto Rican and Latino.
And so you chaired at one point the Black and Latino Caucus.
I did a couple of moons ago.
And because you mentioned you often, now tell me if this is an accurate representation, you often talk about work as a group. Already in this interview, you mentioned, you didn't say I did this. You said the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. You talked about how this is going to be a conversation with many colleagues, some of whom have higher positions. Is if you don't draw a lot of attention to yourself as a legislator. Like some politicians go up there and from day one, they make sure their name is out there a lot. Mm-hmm. And this is what I did. They're looking at other positions they might run for. And then there are other people who get up there and they kind of become part of a team that works to accomplish goals through compromise and working more quietly. Do you see yourself in that second camp? Am I right about that?
You're right about that. I always we need to work in collectively, right, in groups. I think you accomplish a lot more. As an individual, you have ideas. Of course, there's things that I've done individually, like the driver's license for undocumented that I worked on very hard, right?
You did
the cannabis bill that I've been working on for the last 10 years.
You worked on free women's period products.
I worked on that. So I've been working on a lot
the
of
hurricane
different
relief
issues.
on Puerto Rico. You took a lead on that.
Exactly. So for me, it's more about working in conjunction with my colleagues because you cannot accomplish legislation by yourself, right? You have to work collectively and understand that you have colleagues that represent different groups within their own districts, and they have to be accountable to those individuals. So it's always about a compromise, right? It's how do we achieve at least what we want to accomplish with the driver's license, right? There were certain things that I needed to achieve with that bill and the impact that will have on the states and to the undocumented population. But at the end of the day, I also had to work collectively with my colleagues to ensure that I gained their support. And that's critical in everything that we do.
It's an interesting trade-off. Do you find it, because I'm not in that position, I'm in those rooms. Is it true that often you can accomplish more of your goals if you don't try to take most of the credit?
I think that when you work in unison, you get a lot more accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you earn the respect of your colleagues because you're being welcoming to their points of views and their ideas. So what would be some examples from this term? The baby bonds finally getting over the line, the paid sick day expansion. Paid sick days, exactly. That was an issue. First I put paid sick days. We had to get involved in those conversations, specifically with the chair, Manny Sanchez, who was the chair at the time when the bill was before us, and negotiating with him to ensure that la bodegas, for example, right, the local Hispanic store owners, small businesses, when they implement the paid sick days, that they're not, I don't want to say the word jeopardized, but that the impact is not as fast. So we phased it into 3 years. Right now is 50 or more, lowering it to 25, then 25 to 10, I believe it is, and then 1.
But
so
they
one
don't pay,
employee
right?
Qualify.
Under that, doesn't the state pay? Like under paid sick leaves, they don't have a financial harm if they... So what's the threat to the bodegas if they have to be included financially?
Because, right, paying sick days, they thought that people would take advantage of just taking sick days and that they would abuse the system. So we had to ensure that it's something that is earned. You just don't get paid sick days, right? You have to be at least with the employer 180 days, and then you start accumulating sick days. So we took that threat and that concern away by having those negotiations and conversations.
So as a legislator, obviously you hear from everybody.
I do.
Were you hearing from people who needed those sick days and that flexibility, and you were hearing from the bodega owners who were concerned about
and also
staying in business?
My own colleagues, right? Being up there at the Capitol for now going on 21 years, you tend to work so closely with your colleagues that colleagues reach out to you to get your opinion. What are your thoughts on the issues? And those were concerns that I was hearing from other members. And I had to make sure that I relayed that message to the chair and to the Speaker of the House, that these are some of the concerns and we need to adjust the language to ensure that we can get everybody's buy-in and support the legislation.
All right. Juan Candelaria, State Rep, 95th District. That's the Hill, Fairhaven. What other neighborhoods we got there?
A little bit of Worcester, just a sliver. At one point I had it.
I love the way they get carved up.
Yeah, more towards the Hamilton Street area.
Oh, okay. That's where you got that great mini park there. I love that area.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you don't get the park where they're building all those new apartments. That's the part near the downtown by Chapel Street.
No,
that's like a new city.
I think that's maybe Walker, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. But that's kind of interesting. So now a big issue for you over the years was legalizing recreational use of cannabis.
Correct.
You got that over the line. Mm-hmm. We set up a council, an equity council, so that people whose lives were disproportionately impacted or come from communities impacted by the drug war would have first dibs at getting those licenses. There's been a lot of controversy about whether that has succeeded. Your caucus, the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, has said, we think the job isn't being done and we want a review. Tell me what's happened with that recently, how you feel about it as someone who is pushing for this.
Of course, when we started working on the legislation, of course, we looked at other states when other states did. One of the things that we wanted to do was capture the social equity aspect of what Massachusetts did, bring it into our states. We want to make sure that those that were impacted by the war on drugs have an opportunity to really enter into the business. So, but the other issue that we faced with that was that they didn't have working capital. And I wanted to make sure that we didn't have the same issues that Massachusetts were facing, right? So you have people that were able to acquire the license, but unfortunately, they couldn't get access to capital. And banks will not lend, right? So that's the difficult part. So what we did in our end is we took the licensing fees, the application fees, we put in $50 million in bonding to ensure that we help these businesses succeed so they have access to working capital. Let's forward to today. One section within the bill, which is Section 149, would allow for cultivators to grow. Many of those individuals were having a hard time reaching getting the licensing application, which is about $3 million. So that $3 million.
What do you mean $3 million?
So you have to pay $3 million. Yes. As you're hearing? Yep.
I had no idea.
For cultivation. But then if you're breaking down to micro cultivator, it's a lot less dollars to invest, right? If you have any other vertical lines of businesses, for example, delivery, the application fee is a lot less. But cultivation, right, to really create a cultivating facility, it takes a lot of manpower. It takes a lot of dollars.
So
we're talking about between $20 and $30 million.
So $3 million off the top just goes to the state for licensing?
On the cultivation piece.
Wow.
Correct. But we did a change because we were hearing that people were having difficulties. So what we did this year, we did a change in the language where those individuals have the opportunity to convert over to micro cultivators, and they will pay the fees reduced to $1 million, and they will pay in 2 payments.
So then there's also the issue of who gets to open a dispensary. And we had hoped there'd be people of color, and they've been disproportionately these big corporations, right? Or white people.
So you have large
Access to
corporation,
capital.
of course, because they've been doing it for a long time. They have the capital, right, to really get this going. But that's the beauty of this is that the equity joint ventures, right, that you have to partner up with a social equity applicant, where the social equity applicant will own 65% of the business. That's the beauty of it. But it's being funded by a large corporation.
And wasn't that a catch-22? Because I remember there was one person in New Haven who had already been involved in cannabis-related business, woman of color, who wasn't able to get the license because she teamed up for some capital.
I know exactly who you're talking about, and I heard that story.
But that was a very interesting issue because you say you don't want someone to be a front if it's really some big corporation fronting with a person of color, but the real money's going there. But on the other hand, the person of color says we don't have access to the capital, so how are we supposed to get in without that? So was 65% the magic number?
65% was that magic number, exactly. So they will own 65%. And that will guarantee their ownership in this, right? And there was other portion in the bill that they would not be able to sell their portion until at least 3 years in. So that will guarantee at least that they have that ownership. They can build it. And then if they decide to sell, they can at that moment.
And so was that originally the rule? Like, why were these snags happening? Was it not originally a 65 rule?
No, the rule was always there. What happens is how they draft these agreements, right, within the joint equity. Now, the Social Equity Council is scrutinizing more of the agreements where, and I'll give you an example. There was one instance where the individual, although he had 65%, but the language in the contract would allow more control of the minority owner, their 35%, right? So now we strengthen the language to ensure that, you know what? The social equity applicant is the actual owner.
It's going to. So are you okay with the results, or why are we having a review now?
So I'm okay with the result. We made those changes to ensure that people at least have the access to capital and start opening their businesses. The other thing is the revenue, right? This is generating right now, as you know, those municipalities that allow cannabis establishments in their towns will get at least 3% back of the taxes generated. Plus, we're taking some of those dollars and really investing it in our communities. One of the things that we're doing, which is very important, is if you have individuals that want to open their own businesses, with the dollars, the revenue generated out of the sale of cannabis, they will have access to capital to do that. They will have the technical assistance. You don't have to open a cannabis establishment, but you can have access to those funds. Mm-hmm. And that was the purpose for us.
Is that for minority business development?
Correct. So how critical it was to ensure that those impacted by the war on drugs have an opportunity to have access to capital, have the technical assistance so that they can open up their own businesses.
So what are the issues now that are going to be explored in this review that the caucus has asked from Governor Lamont?
So the review now, we're talking about some of the dollars that were raised is how those dollars going to be spent. Will they go to help small business owners, right? Or would it go to nonprofits so they can provide social services? So that is the piece there where the language itself was more broad, and we want to hone it in. And that's what's
And what do you
happening
want to
with
see
that.
happen?
For me, I think we need to, the backbones of our community is these small businesses. For me, ensuring that we support small businesses is critical, but it's also critical to ensure that our nonprofits have the capital that they need and the resources that they need so that they can do the work that needs to be done.
So what needs to be fixed here to make sure that both groups are getting it? Is only one group getting it now?
We have to figure out what portion will go for
nonprofits and so much for small businesses. And what would you like to see?
I think a combination of both, I think, is important.
And how much are we getting a year?
Top of my head, Paul, I really don't recall, but right now we had about $37 million in funds.
Because, of course, one of the big questions there, it's not a Connecticut question, it's a national question, in New York especially, which is that we set up this licensing so the state would get money so people could be confident what they're buying, and everybody's selling it illegally at bodegas. Not just bodegas, but, smoke shops.
Right, a smoke shop. And part of the language that we passed this time around was strengthening and putting more oversight to ensure that we're monitoring those smoke shops.
And where did you put that?
That's part of the language in the bill that we just passed this year.
Which bill was that?
5150.
No, but I mean, was it a cannabis bill?
Cannabis bill. That's the same bill where we made the where we allow cultivators to convert to microcultivators. Is within that same language. Bill number 5150.
All right. Juan Candelaria, State Representative, 95th District. What have you noticed about as the Latino population has grown? Because it used to be called, it's still called the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, the Puerto Rican and Latino Caucus, because when you start out in politics, is it fair to say that even though we were starting to get a lot of immigration from Latin American countries, still the Latino political presence was Puerto Rican for the most part. And it's still an important, obviously, largest group in politics, and we have the hurricanes to deal with. But how has that evolved as more and more people are elected and participating in politics from Latin American countries? How is that redefining what it means to be Latino in Connecticut politics?
So here's the thing, and I think we as Latinos, we consider ourselves one community, although we come from different countries. I'm a Puerto Rican, right? And I've done a lot of legislation that addresses the undocumented community. Why? Because when people look at us, they're not looking at one is Puerto Rican, the other one is Mexican or Ecuadorian. We all Latinos, and we all have to stick together. And we have to ensure that we help lift the Hispanic community from poverty, right? And so we need to continue working collectively. So for me, it's critical that they are at the table, that we're having these discussions, and we do that consistently. Right, so that we can address the needs of our communities.
Was there a particular undocumented bill this session that you worked on?
Nothing this session. No, this session was very quickly. As you heard, we went through a whole process with the budget, and we didn't even pass the budget. But it was very short sessions fly so quickly that you don't have time. So the long session is, I think, the best because you get to work on legislation before session starts, and you have the long session to really work with your colleagues to tweak legislation to make sure that we collectively, address whatever issues we're facing.
So Latinos are the fastest growing population in Connecticut demographically, correct?
And throughout the nation.
And at our schools now, a plurality of students, Latino students, going to be
48%.
And pretty soon
I'm
it's
not
going to be a majority.
Somewhere around there.
Does that correspond to political clout when so many people can't vote?
Good question, Paul. It does have an impact, but I think at the end of the day, they are integrated within the political process, even if they cannot vote, because they can go out there, knock on doors, talk to voters. They can express what the needs of our community are. They are embedded in our communities. They're part of our fabric.
And we now have our first Latina superintendent of schools. Because I think schools seems to be the number one government venue through which this is like, well, first we had the ID card a generation ago, but now it seems like this is important that
It is.
we got to be
It
able
is
to deal with the
important. And
needs of the largest group of students.
And the need gets even worse and worse, Paul.
So are the needs,
because-
how do you identify the need? Is bilingual education
So
the number
bilingual
one?
education is critical. I did a lot of work, and I don't, like you said, I don't talk about what I did. But if you recall, about 3 or 4 years ago, I modified the bilingual language, because what was happening is students come in from different countries, and for them to acquire the language can take 3 years. Others are more slower. They might take 4 or 5 years. But after 3 years, you were thrown back to a mainstream classroom, and everything's in English, so you had to survive. So what we did, we expanded it to 6 years so that we can accommodate those students that need more time to acquire the language.
And that's not just Spanish language, like
That's
Pashtun is a
Spanish.
big one here. I know we
Exactly.
a lot
You
of people
have
from
a lot of
Afghanistan.
students. Right now, the biggest issue is that we're having is a lot of students coming from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough
In your
teachers in the
district.
classrooms.
It's
Correct.
big in the hill, right?
Big in the hill. And we don't have enough bilingual teachers that speak Arabic that can communicate. So here you have sometimes teacher presenting probably, from what I heard in the meeting that was earlier today, they're presenting, if they need to go to Boston, they raise a picture. This is what I need to do, because it's hard to communicate. So that's the thing, a critical component that we have to go back and work on. I know I'm going to work on that as well to ensure that we hire more bilingual teachers. Although we passed the bill on minority teacher recruitment, but we have to do more than that.
So looking ahead and how you deal with that issue, how are you going to address that?
So I think we have to look at, we did a little bit of changes this time around so that we lift restrictions of how teachers can teach, right? Some are subject matter experts, and we want them to go across the board and teach. So we made a couple of changes there. What I think we have to look at is, how do we get more teachers into our system? And we have to look at the tests that these teachers have to take. Because many teachers, when you have to take the Proxy 1, Proxy 2, right, those are very hard tests, and we hear this consistently. So we have to look, does it make sense? Can we look at the testing itself and maybe make changes in that area so that we can have more teachers?
Are they
in our
hard in
classroom?
a way that doesn't make for better teachers, or is they hard in a way that you'd want them to have high standards?
Not so much about the high standard. I think it has to focus more on how difficult it makes it for the individual, especially an individual that English is a second language.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that the system's going to be more and more adjusting to.
Correct.
State Rep Juan Candelaria, you've been there 11 terms, right? You're going for your 12th? I got that wrong at the top.
12.
And so was there a day this session where you said, boy, I've done this a lot, and this is why I do it, this is what the challenge is bigger than I thought, or a day where you said, this is why I do it, because this is how I made a difference today? Can you think of a day like that from a session?
I do. All the time, really, all the time. I'm privileged to be in this position, Paul. Here is a Puerto Rican that migrated from Puerto Rico when I was 8 years old, lived in New Haven all my life. Since then, this is my home, and have the privilege to represent the 95th district at the Capitol. That's in itself is a privilege. I would never thought that a jibarito, which we call a country guy in Puerto Rico, will be here today representing a community. Just that in itself fulfills me.
The grandeur at the Capitol gets me. Anytime I'm there, I feel
Every
like,
time I walk in
is
there,
it like
I'm impressed.
Disneyland, or is it
It
the
is.
U.S. Capitol? I mean, this thing is all the big columns and the high ceilings and the artwork. I just kind of feel
it's
like
just beautiful, and it's very impressive. And then when you really realize that, everything happens in this building.
Uh-huh.
Because what I do doesn't only impact the 95th, it impacts everyone in the state of Connecticut. So it's just very powerful, very meaning. But I think it's important that we continue to focus, listen to our constituents, and really do the work.
So when you listen to your constituents, you're a Democrat,
Mm-hmm.
and you've always been.
Yes.
The Latino community has moved much. It used to be overwhelmingly Democrat when they vote. Now it's getting to be pretty much 50-50. Why is that happening, and what are you hearing, and how are you reacting to that?
So I'll be honest with you on this one, Paul. And what I've been hearing a lot is that sometimes the Democratic Party has really not paid attention to the Latino community, where you see the Republican Party now courting the Latinos even more. They're asking them to run for office, and we need to start doing that. as a Democratic Party. I think
So you
we
think
have to
you need to run
engage.
more candidates, Latino candidates?
Correct.
What about specific issues? Like, let's take, because the issues, human beings are complicated. They have some issues where they agree with some people, some with others. There are some issues like abortion, even immigration, where there's a real divide, correct?
There's
I mean, a lot of
divide,
people...
even within our own party.
I'm saying that a lot of Latino voters genuinely agree with Republicans more on abortion. I don't know about
Exactly,
LGBT
because-
issues or
correct.
immigration, but not everybody. But so could it maybe just say Latinos are like other human beings, and like it's great that people have different views, and that you're not going to just count them on one party. You got to go out every election and just
I think
win
it's
'em.
important because you need individuals in both parties at the end of the day. So I think you have, within our own community, you have very religious and conservative. You have people that were raised a specific way and they have conservative views. But you have others that have changed it with the tides, right? We have to change to accommodate.
Now you're
because
talking about like LGBT issues, correct?
LGBT issues,
Immigration,
correct.
abortion.
Abortion, because those are serious issues that we need to address, and we need to ensure we always inclusive of everyone.
So what should the Democratic Party do with that vote? Should they say there's room for you if you have that view, but we're going to continue standing for LGBT rights and abortion being safe and
Exactly.
legal?
We have a stance as Democrats, but we need to be inclusive as well.
So how
But
do
we
you do
have-
that?
I think we open up the doors to dialogue. We open the doors to conversations, right? We open the doors to understanding what their concerns are, their issues are. It's all about a conversation and a dialogue, right? And then we come to a medium or a compromise when we accomplish things.
And how Joe says Hispanics are more conservative than the historical vote.
All about education and conversation. A lot of it may be perception and not understanding whatever the legislation may be.
It was so interesting because one issue you did take a lead on, if I remember correctly, was not having the word Latin X, and now I guess it's Latina with an E.
Latine, correct.
That
With an E.
is, you had a bill not to use that in the government. You got national coverage for that. That was one moment where you actually were getting national press. What was that, last year, not this year, correct?
It was last year, correct.
And that passed, correct?
It did pass.
So that to me seemed like the reason I got so much attention, because it really didn't affect a whole lot of things, was it seemed like you were responding to me. Tell me if this is correct. You were responding to hearing from your constituents that they didn't like this new
Correct.
approach. And what was that about?
So you have a lot of Latinos that they felt very uncomfortable identifying as Latinx, being grouped into one where they consider themselves Latino or Latina. What we wanted to do to ensure that we were inclusive, we added Latine, right? For other groups that want to identify different, because that's important to be inclusive.
So you were okay with Latin A.
Of course.
That's with an
definitely.
E at
we
the
have to
end?
be inclusive.
So what was it about Latinx?
Just people just generally, Latinos did not feel comfortable with the term.
Because my read
and
on it
there's-
was that it was a class thing. They
and
felt like this
even
was an
the
academic thing.
Right, academic thing, but it's more of the Spanish language does not recognize Latinx, right? So they were recognizing Latino, Latina, and Latine. And now what you're seeing is a trend throughout the nation where you're seeing Latine being used more. than
And what does
Latinx.
Latin A mean? Neither gender?
It doesn't have, is non-gender.
And why is that different from X? Because it's truer to the religion? I mean to the language?
Because it conforms with the Spanish language.
That's kind of
And that-
interesting.
Exactly, and that's what people felt.
So I don't want to overstate this point. Do you feel that's an example of how to navigate the cultural trends that are leading many Latinos not to vote Democratic anymore?
Yeah, I think that's a part of it. It's a part of being inclusive. It's about being part of really providing solutions and addressing everybody's concern collectively.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we were able to address everyone's concerns by adopting Latina, utilizing still Latino and Latina.
How did you adopt Latin A? Did you have to do anything to do that or just
Well,
not
we had
ban
to.
it?
We did a bill at the legislature that anything that is generated from higher ed and at the state level that they utilize the word Latine.
So you
instead
actually
of
said in the
Latinx.
bill to say
Yes.
Latin A instead of Latinx.
Correct.
That's really interesting.
It is. And I have to say that bill was really, although I was a co-sponsor of the bill, it was spearheaded by Jerry Regis from Waterbury. So I want to acknowledge him for that.
Okay. So Juan, you're running for a 12th term. How come?
I love what I do. I love when I'm walking in New Haven and someone approaches me that I may not recognize and say thank you for what you do. Thank you for, because the bill that you worked on, now I can drive. I can take my skills to school. I can go to work and not be afraid that an officer is going to stop me, give me a ticket, or arrest me, or deport me. So when I hear those stories, I feel good. Now, even with the cannabis bill, when we invested in our communities, we're giving back. Instead of those dollars going to the black market and having them spend those dollars, we are reinvesting those dollars in our communities, and we're making impact. And that's what I love about it.
So feel you can make a difference in people's lives.
Exactly.
So how are you looking at this statewide and national elections this year in terms of the Latino vote? We're reading a lot about that's really what could put Donald Trump over the line to become the next president.
Exactly. So I think that the president still have a strong hold. But on the other side, you have, when we look at Florida, you have the Cubans, you have some of the Puerto Ricans that are very conservative, voting Republican. So there are some concerns. We're just going to have to wait. What's going to happen? A lot is happening currently. You saw what happened with the ex-president, right? And how that's going to play a role in the coming elections. Let's see what happens there, if he'll continue or not. It looks like he's going to continue to run. But hopefully at the end of the day, we will be victorious and we continue the same agenda that we've been doing.
Well, Juan Candelaria, what a treat it is to put you on the other side of the microphone. You're usually a host here on Saturdays on Hechos y Opiniones.
Hechos y Opiniones.
And on WNHH. Thanks for being a guest today on Dateline New Haven.
No, thank you, Paul, for the opportunity.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And thanks to Harry Drost, the best station manager in the biz.
Hey, Harry.
We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.